Hi, this is Catherine. This is Taking Tea with Catherine. This is an elderberry fruit tea or herbal tea from McNulty's, which is a shop in Greenwich Village, New York that I like to go to when I can. And it's a hot tea and it's a hot day out, so I have the air conditioner on, and I'm sorry if that's distracting. It is for me a necessary evil, and I am a study in contrast, hot tea, air, air conditioning. Um, but I wanted to talk. Obviously, the reason we need air conditioning is because we are in the summer. It is now July, and so I am talking about June. And I had a really good reading month in June, so I want to do a reading wrap up. And so I'm going to do that. I will be talking about 5 books that I read in June. I read a couple other ones, but these are the ones I feel like talking about. And I think I'm going to start out with the one that is not my physical book. It was a book I read on my Kindle, and it was a book I had been looking forward to reading, and I have thoughts. So it was a book about The Princes in the Tower by Philippa Langley. I don't have the title in front of me, but it's basically, how do I put this? Philippa Langley, if you've been watching this channel long enough, her name might seem familiar because she is very active in the Richard III Society. She was a very big driving force behind finding, in I think it was 2012, the remains of Richard III under a car park in Leicester, England. And that already gave her a lot of street cred amongst the Ricardians, as they call them. And she is very much under the belief that Richard III was extremely maligned, that everything that they say about him being the usurper, being a child killer, and everything else is wrong. I am on a sort of middle area, which there are people like me who are in the middle. Because people tend to think that one goes either thinking that Richard III was a monster that did all the evil things that happened in his lifetime, or that he was this innocent hero person that died. I mean, he did seem to die bravely, but that, that was everything that bad said about him came from Henry Tudor and his Tudor propaganda, whatever. I think there was something in the middle, and basically he was the youngest brother and the living brother of Edward IV, King of England. Edward IV had a number of children. 2 of them were boys, so that when he died pretty suddenly, his eldest son, also Edward, and the younger son was Richard, Edward became king. And when he was making his way down to London, he was intercepted by Richard, which wasn't a bad thing necessarily because he was his uncle, and he was the Duke of Gloucester. He had a very large position in England, and he was named as the protector because the new King Edward was 12 or 13 years old, still quite young. Anyway, but shortly after this, any coronation ended up not happening, and Richard came up with possible evidence. Well, I say he came up with it, but he at least accepted it, however it came to be, that his elder brother, who was, king, had married or pre-contracted marriage with somebody else besides the mother of the boys, which would make the marriage to Elizabeth Woodville, the mother, invalid, which means that they couldn't be king or anything like that, so that the next in line would be Richard, so he became Richard III. Somewhat reluctantly, apparently, but there's a lot that goes behind this, and I'm not going to get into everything, but the point is that before the year was up, the boys were not heard of again. They were thought to have been killed, and many thought that he might have ordered their deaths, which is possible because they were a threat. Even though they were proclaimed illegitimate, there were a lot of people who wouldn't buy that, and I understand that. So now, if he did that, that would be pretty messed up to order the death of your nephews. However, there is actually no proof that he did that. It's just motive, opportunity, and all that, which there was a lot of motive, honestly. The thing is that no one can really no matter what they think of him, you can't 100% say that he had them killed at all. They may have died, they may have gotten sick and died, who knows? Or they may have escaped. But Philippa Langley, very, very, very important in the Richard III Society, finding the remains of Richard III, all this stuff. She has seemed to make it her life's work to proclaim Richard III innocent. And she had this whole Prince's project wherein she had a bunch of people all over the place coming up with research to try to prove that they were not killed by Richard. And one of the things that would prove that is absolute proof that these boys somehow escaped the tower. And I say escaped, whether through Richard's auspices or someone else's, ended up in Europe and or elsewhere, and then possibly were the pretenders that threatened Henry Tudor, the next king after Richard. Now, that means that she says she treats this as some kind of forensic cold case. I'm not sure if that's exactly what the definition of cold case is, but I went with it because it's really an interesting subject to me. And there was a documentary that I watched that covered this whole situation, and then I read the book. Now, the book is fascinating. There are a lot of background pieces of information, some of which I hadn't really seen much of. And as someone who really loves this time period in terms of just reading about it, the history, I don't want to live in that time for sure, but that in itself would make it an interesting enough book to read. It's not extremely linear. It's just, it kind of does go a little bit all over the place. And I think that if you were to read this book, you should have more background first, have read other books about the Wars of the Roses, the Princes in the Tower, Richard III, etc. But, and the Tudor Pretenders, yes, that's another thing you should read about. And read the differing points of view. Alison Weir is someone who believes that Richard III was completely guilty. And then there are other people like Nathan Amin, who is a biographer of Henry VII. So you would think, okay, he's on his side, but he does open up to a lot of conjecture, which is great. So yeah, I would say read as widely as possible if you're interested in the subject before you read this book. But while this was interesting, and while it had pieces of information, documents, etc., that came out that may have meant that their aunt, who lived in, I think, was it Burgundy, and had backup from like the Holy Roman Emperor and all these kind of people, financed these Tudor pretenders, and that therefore it must have meant that they were the surviving princes in the tower, because why else would she do that? Well, that's a possibility, but it's not definite. She may have just really disliked Henry Tudor and wanted to give him trouble. So there is no evidence. It's just opens up possibilities. And I think that was the problem with the book, is that it starts with we're just getting all this evidence together. We're just working on this research. We're doing all this extensive research. But then they started using expressions that basically felt like they were confident that the Tudor pretenders were Lambert Simnel and Perkin Warbeck were Edward V and then Richard, Duke of York. So it got a little annoying because it was too certain, and I feel like that she's a little too biased in her opinion. She really wants to prove that Richard III was not behind their deaths. So I feel like anything that she finds is going to just be skewed in that direction. So I gave it 3 stars, which means that even though I did find it interesting, I just found a lot of, and I'm not, I did not study history. I actually did really bad in history in school. I just am very interested in it. I just read a lot about it. I just feel like it gave one food for thought, and it keeps me exactly where I am now, where I was before, I mean. And the fiction that I read, the historical fiction about Richard III, was, it really did get me to want to declare him innocent and be, all about that, because people romanticize things and great storytellers, Sharon K. Penman and Josephine Tay and people like that. Even Jean Plady was pretty, pro Richard And so I would like to see something that comes out that exonerates him in some way, but I don't think it exists, and I don't think that he was 100% innocent. I just don't think he was the complete monster that he has been accused of being. So anyway, I can go on for 100 years about just this one book, but this is a wrap up. I'm not going to keep talking about it. I only regret because I know it came out in November, and Jennifer Brooks did a lovely vlog while she was reading this book, and she was pretty into Richard III, and I would have loved to have discussed it with her after I finished the book, but I won't get that opportunity anymore, so I'm a little sad about that. There's been a lot of sad losses recently in the booktube community, and an even more recent one, but I will probably talk about that another time. So yeah, anyway, I still say if you read a little bit about this subject and you want to keep reading, maybe put that in a future reads, and but just yeah. Anyway, so getting on to other books, but let's get into another history-related one that comes less than 100 years later, more like I don't know, 50, 60, 70 years later. And this is a novel. I mentioned Alison Weir before. This is her, I don't know if this is part of her series. She had like the Tudor queens, and technically she was a Tudor queen, Mary the First, but she was a reigning queen. So that's a little bit different than the Wives of Henry VIII. But anyway, this is the latest book. This is what it's called in the United States, The Passionate Tudor, a novel of Queen Mary I. It's called something different in the UK. I think something like Queen of Sorrows or something. I'm not sure if I dreamt that. But anyway, but this is Alison Weir's latest. I don't know what else she's got coming up. But it is about Mary the First, so from when she was younger and had expectations of being, she was the daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon. And when she was a little bit younger, she was the Princess of Wales. She was in expectation of being the next Queen of England if no other sons were born. But then Henry VIII ended up, well, if you know anything about the Tudor history, Henry VIII wanted to annul his marriage to Catherine and marry again Anne Boleyn and get sons from her, and then Catherine resisted, and lots of back and forth. Henry left the Rome, the Catholic Church, although he was always Catholic, really, by his, I think, at heart, just that he didn't want to be under the Pope. And Catherine of Aragon was separated from Mary. Mary had to endure years of not having support from her father, being kept from her mother, having Anne Boleyn not like her whatsoever. The feeling was mutual. And as the years went by, even though sometimes things got a little bit better, she felt herself often having to uphold her religious beliefs. And once Henry died, his son, he finally had a son, Edward VI, was very, very Protestant and wanted his older sister to be the same. So she did endure a form of persecution. And that part of the book is really interesting. You do realize that Mary did go through quite a lot, and she actually had a lot of health issues she seemed to deal with in the autumn. And you feel, when you're reading this book, whether you're a Catholic or Protestant or nothing, or any whatever your beliefs are, you do feel for her to go through these difficulties until she becomes queen, and she ends up persecuting Protestants and marrying Philip of Spain, who was not Prince Philip at the time, who was not really someone that most people in England wanted to be the King of England, or even a consort of the Queen of England. And the way she treated her sister Elizabeth, the paranoias, the burning of the heretics, everything, you start to really dislike her. Even if it's from her point of view, you start to say, man, what are you doing after everything? You're, and so I was trying to figure out, is that how Alison Weir wanted me to feel? And then I read her author's note, and yes, that's exactly what she wanted. She said, I feel like she related to her because she was child of divorce too, at a similar age, and went through things, but also did not like her choices and her actions at that point. And I have to say, I feel the same. I don't always agree with everything Alison Weir writes, but in this respect, it was hard to take sides with Mary because it was painful. And also because she was, even though there was Jane Grey and Matilda many years back who gave it a shot, really she was technically the first reigning queen of England. And if you're in that position, you really want to be able to prove that your father not wanting a woman to succeed, everything like that, every reason that why people didn't want a woman, to be the monarch, that you can prove them wrong. But she kind of proved them the other way. And I know there's other books that are very pro Mary, and I might read them at some point. But it was tragic. It was to me tragic. It was sad. She died pretty young, but I still found this book very interesting, and I say action-packed. Just that time period is always fascinating to me. So if you're interested in reading Tudor era books, I would say add this. It's pretty good. I feel like they kind of make everybody else after she becomes queen seem almost better than her, including her council and Philip and Reginald Pole. Everybody except the Pope, because the Pope seemed to be a mess too, which was kind of sad actually, because she wanted to return to Rome so badly, and the Pope wasn't really great toward her or her husband. But yeah, a lot of thoughts, right? So anyway, moving on to something slightly different. I found this book when I was in Chicago. Didn't buy it because I'm trying not to buy too many things full price, and that's where I found it. So I took it out of the library, and it's called The English Experience, a novel by Julie Schumacher. I didn't realize it, even though I should have, because it's in the description, that this is the third book, maybe the last book, in a possible trilogy about this character. His name is Professor Fitker. He's in his 60s, and he is assigned to take to a bunch of students, some of which he doesn't know at all, to England for some time period. I forgot how many times. Was it 3 weeks? I think something like that. Maybe a little bit longer. And he doesn't really like England because he's been there before with his ex-wife, and his ex-wife seems to be making a move on too. They've been in regular touch because they share a dog. But so he's got a lot on his mind, and now he's got to deal with taking a bunch of college students to England, to a place he's not crazy about, and dealing with that situation. So it's not always a positive view, but it's kind of cool because there's so many different types of students and different perspectives and different study majors, and some of them are they're very excited about their trip, and some of them are really into it, and some are just anti everything they see. So their essays that are usually at the end of chapters are usually pretty funny. So it's like there's one mini disaster after another. The professor keeps getting injured, but it has a pretty satisfying ending. It wasn't hilariously funny, but it was a fun enough quick read. If you like reading stories about, I don't know, the college experience and traveling abroad and what generational divides, that sort of thing, I wouldn't say that I was motivated enough to read the first two books, although I'm not saying I'm anti doing so, but it was fun. I mean, obviously I picked it because I just thought, oh, reading about a trip to England, that'll be fun, but it wasn't necessarily entirely positive, especially about Bath. Going into Jane Austen July, I like to think about Bath a little more, because a lot of stories, Northanger Abbey, for instance, and Persuasion, my favorite, have many important scenes in Bath. But anyway, so if that floats your boat, that might be an interesting one to pick up. But not leaving that part of the world yet, I have talked about Christopher Fowler multiple times in this channel. He died last year, and I was very sad about that. I love his Bryant and May books, and I found this actually. I had read a short story collection not too long ago, and this is one that was written earlier, and it is called London's Glory. So it just takes cases that this couple, these, well, I said couple, Arthur Bryant and John May, who are of the Peculiar Crimes Unit. It's always hard for me to say that for some reason. They just had some cases that maybe didn't need to be covered in an entire novel, or sometimes there's certain little just experiments that Christopher Fowler was doing, and he just felt he could include it in this collection. So I thought this was a good addition to this series, if you will, especially since there's almost nothing left for me to read in this series unless I want to reread. I didn't think it was as good as I can't remember the other name of the collection, it's on the tip of my tongue, but was it England's Finest or something like that? Or yeah, something like that. But I thought the second one was actually better, but it was satisfying enough. So I would say this is up there. It was a 4-star read for me, not a 5-star, but I don't regret a minute of reading it. There were some pretty funny ones, but there were some that ended a little bit abruptly. It didn't really explain things for me, or they were just random. And yeah, so good, but not like the best that I've read of Christopher Fowler, but still 4-star for me. Okay, last but not least, I don't think, this was going to my neck of the woods. This is a book called All the Beauty in the World, The Metropolitan Museum of Art and Me by Patrick Bringley, who worked as a security guard for, I think, 9 years, I think. He is no longer, but this is his memoir of not just his work as a security guard and people that he worked with, which I thought was pretty cool, actually, but also about the different works of art, the different exhibits that are there, and sometimes relating them to his own life, sometimes just observing it. And so it kind of takes you on a tour of the museum without being, now we shall proceed over here. It starts with, sadly, he lost his older brother, I believe it was cancer, and that moves him to move on from his previous writing job, or sort of writing job, and just go a different direction. And it's not, even though I love the Metropolitan Museum of Art, I really love it, I don't think I could ever work as in security because I can't stand that long. I literally cannot stand that long anywhere. I went to the Met Museum last week, and I wasn't there very long, but I was sitting as often as I could, and that's just me. But anyway, I shouldn't project onto other people because some people have different strengths than I do, but it didn't seem like a horrible job, actually. If I were able to stand and work the hours that they have to work, it almost seems like something I wouldn't mind doing. But I love the perspective of someone who really loved the museum and what he saw there. So I love going there. I don't go there as often as I used to. Like, I would say a good 10 years ago, I used to almost weekly, at least once or twice a month, at least. I would walk sometimes from where I work, which is quite the walk now, which is something I tried to do last week, and I did it, but man, I was tired. I am not what I used to be, but, or sometimes I would take the train, bus, whatever, and just spend time in different parts of the museum. I still love it. I don't get tired of it. I still get lost. And part of it is because they move things. But I'm glad I read this book because it, I think, was a very positive experience of the museum, but it was also a memoir. Some people may not like when people intersperse memoirs with commentary on a place, but I like it. This is something I'm really into. I love memoirs, and not all memoirs. Some are extremely self-centered. This one wasn't. It was personal, but it wasn't like, oh my goodness, get off of yourself. It was also a good, I don't know about learning experience, but yeah, you learn a little bit if you don't know a lot about the museum. Solid book and good reads. I say good reads. No, they were. All of the reads that I read were pretty much good to me. Even the one I gave 3 stars to. So I thought it was a pretty good reading month. And I also reread Wives and Daughters. I spent a long time discussing that with a reading group, so I'm a little tired out now. But that was definitely a 5-star. So if you are at all into Victorian literature, or if you are thinking about something to read for Victober, I would definitely give Wives and Daughters a recommend. If you like Jane Austen, now that we're in Jane Austen July, I would give Wives and Daughter a recommend. Not exactly the same, but similar enough. Anyway, so that was my month. Let me know if you've read any of these books, if you think similarly or maybe a little differently. What are your thoughts? What have you read recently? Anything particularly standing out to you in the month of June? I would like to know. And so that is all for now. If you like talking about these things, some of them are quite rambly and some of them are a little bit broken record of me. But if you are interested in any of these things, please subscribe, like, ring bells, whatever you have to do on YouTube, all the things. Thank you for watching. This is Catherine at Taking Tea with Catherine. Have a lovely tea and book-filled day.